Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, April 22nd. And tonight, we remember one of the greatest hockey players in Canadian history. The Montreal Canadiens announced the death of Ghee Lafleur, who was 70 years old. Mr. Lafleur was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2019, and following surgery, received some bad news in October 2020 that the cancer was back. NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman says Mr. Lefleur cut a dashing and unmistakable figure whenever he blazed down the ice. Mr. Lefleur was named as one of the NHL's 100 greatest players of all time in 2017 and still holds the team's all-time record for assists and points. The Hudson's Bay Company is calling the donation of its landmark Winnipeg building to a First Nations group an act of reconciliation. The retailer announced the gift of the nearly century-old sprawling limestone building to the Southern Chiefs organization today. HBC Executive Chairman Richard Baker calls it a new moment of cooperation and partnership. Grand Chief Jerry Daniels says the powerful symbolism of having a colonial store in the hands of Indigenous peoples will stand as a beacon of hope. Ottawa is making moves to ease some remaining COVID-19 restrictions at the border starting on Monday. Unvaccinated children aged 5 to 11 traveling with a fully vaccinated adult will no longer need a COVID-19 test to enter the country. Fully vaccinated travelers and any kids under 12 with them won't have to provide their quarantine plans, wear a mask for 2 weeks, keep a list of contacts, or even report COVID-19 symptoms. Well, it looks like Canada continues to speak out against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland says Canada won't be a part of any meeting where Russia is taking part. Ms. Freeland was in Washington this week for meetings of G20 finance ministers and the International Monetary Fund. She says Russia should be booted out of the G20. Ms. Freeland hinted that the feeling isn't unanimous. Canada has also delivered M777 howitzers and ammunition to Ukraine, as previously promised. Meanwhile, Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem says that he won't rule anything out when it comes to taming Canada's out-of-control inflation. Governor Macklem spoke to reporters virtually yesterday from Washington, D.C., where he was attending meetings. Mr. Macklem says it will take longer for inflation to recede due to ongoing supply chain disruptions, the war in Ukraine, and the spike in COVID-19 cases in China. StatsCan reported this week that Canada's inflation rate soared to a 3-decade high in March, hitting 6.7%. Well, Statistics Canada also indicates retail sales rose 0.1% to $59.9 billion in February. But its initial estimate for March suggests a gain of 1.4%. The agency says gains in February for sales at clothing and clothing accessory stores and gasoline stations were offset by a 5.1% drop in sales at motor vehicle and parts dealers. In volume terms, retail sales were down 0.4% in February. All right, turning to the north now, where Inuit leaders have endorsed a plan that aims to change Inuit relations with government. The Inuit Ninangat policy is a done deal. Justin Trudeau describes it as a potentially transformative policy for people in the north. The policy acknowledges the massive Inuit Ninangat as a distinct geopolitical region, and it creates a framework for the government to make decisions involving Inuit. The Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions is calling on Federal Auditor General Karen Hogan to look into unfair practices. It wants Ms. Hogan to find out how many privately contracted nurses are working for health authorities and doing the same work as staff while being paid far more. The Federation says it wants to learn if recruitment and retention of staff nurses are being undermined by the higher wages that contractors get. And it wants to know exactly what the average pay rate is. Contract nurses are ultimately paid with public funds, even though they work for private agencies. Mosques in Edmonton are being urged to be vigilant after mail containing a white powdery substance was delivered to 2 places of worship. The National Council of Canadian Muslims says the first delivery was reported to police last week. This was after an employee of a mosque in the city's southeast opened a package and white powder burst out. The powder turned out to be harmless. However, another mosque in southwest Edmonton has reported that it received a similar package with the same substance. The police hate crime and violent extremism unit is investigating. We'll have more news from around the world coming up after the break. A look at coral reef health on Earth Day up next. So stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Today is Earth Day, and governments across the world are making moves to highlight the importance of investing in our planet. More than 240 cities in Canada are taking part in Earth Day activities this year, which is double the number from last year. However, a lot of attention is being given to what we can do on the land, which is why this Earth Day, we wanted to shed light on a recent report that looked at oceans and coral reefs. This report by the Vibrant Oceans Initiative, which included research from an international team of environmental scientists, indicates that urgent action is required, or almost all of Earth's coral reefs will be dead in 30 years. But how would the death of these coral reefs impact people, industry, and the environment? Well, joining us now to give us more insight into coral reefs and the important roles that they play is Dr. Julia Baum, professor at the University of Victoria, an expert in marine ecology, coral reefs, and conservation. Dr. Baum, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, ma'am, what would you say are the main takeaways from this new report?
The new report is really highlighting the fact that coral reefs are incredibly vulnerable, particularly to climate change. We know that more conservation for them is needed. And so in this particular report, they're really highlighting the fact that we need more coral reef sanctuaries and we need more sustainable financing to protect coral reefs. So it's not simply enough to identify where these sanctuaries should be. They also then need to be properly managed and enforced. And so that long-term sustainable financing informed by the best climate science is really needed as well.
And what would be the main causes behind the deaths of these coral reefs?
Right now, it's climate change, without a doubt. So coral reefs are the most vulnerable marine ecosystems to climate change. And we've had a lot of marine heat waves recently. So I'm in British Columbia, and out here, of course, we had the heat dome on land last year. So we all got a feel for what that's like when temperatures are above what's comfortable for us. That also happens in the ocean. And when it happens on coral reefs, they're really vulnerable to tiny changes in the temperature of the environment around them. It causes coral bleaching and then can pretty rapidly cause the corals to die. And so we've seen global coral bleaching events all happening around the planet where corals are bleaching on reefs everywhere and dying. And the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is predicting that those will continue to increase as we move forward, which is why urgent action is needed.
And bringing this back to our Canadian viewers, how do coral reefs help humans, and why should people care about coral reefs in particular?
Well, I would say that coral reefs are arguably the most beautiful ecosystems that we have on the entire planet. They're akin to rainforests, but underwater. And underwater, they are like cities teeming with life. They have tens of thousands of species, so extraordinarily beautiful. Of course, in Canada, we probably only see coral reefs on the television if we're watching a documentary, or perhaps if we're lucky enough to, go on holiday somewhere and maybe snorkel or dive. But for hundreds of millions of people around the world, coral reefs are incredibly important for them. Reef fisheries are providing the primary source of protein for hundreds of millions of people, and 500 million people on the planet rely on coral reefs either directly for food or indirectly for their livelihoods through tourism, for example.
All right, ma'am, just over a minute left here, but what sort of solutions should we take away from researchers in this report?
Right. So in this report, they're advocating for a number of things. More marine protected areas to directly protect coral reefs. As I said, financing to actually help manage those. But also mitigating local stressors. So it's not just climate change that's impacting coral reefs. We know that there are a lot of other things that people do on land, from coastal development and all of the pollution that entails, to overfishing, and that causes coral diseases as well. So there's all sorts of local pressures. So they talk as well about the importance of alleviating some of those local pressures and hopefully ensuring that the reefs have a little bit more resilience to the climate change that they do face.
All right, Dr. Baum, just about 45 seconds here. Bringing this back to Canada, we know we share coasts with the Pacific Ocean, with the Atlantic Ocean. So are there any vulnerable marine ecosystems for Canadians to consider this Earth Day?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, we're a coastal country. We have the world's longest coastline, and here in Canada, we have gorgeous, lush kelp forests, which are like underwater forests, and they're actually the most vulnerable temperate marine ecosystems. And we know that we've been losing a lot of kelp forests to marine heat waves as well. So increasing protection for them in Canada is also of paramount importance.
All right, Dr. Julia Baum from the University of Victoria, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Stay with us. When we return from commercial break, we'll be joined by Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, for our weekly cryptocurrency and digital asset update. And after Catherine debriefs us on the updates in the world of crypto over the past week, we'll of course have more stories from around the world. Stay with us. Now it's time for Forum Daily's Crypto and Digital Asset Update. Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, joins us to walk us through the big moves in the field from this past week. All yours, Catherine.
Thanks, Seema. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly Crypto and Digital Asset Update. I am Catherine Murray. Well, we have seen an overall move higher in Bitcoin this week, up by about 4% week over week, hitting 41,300. We, of course, are also keeping our eyes on the Ukraine-Russia war, and it has been called the first ever crypto war, meaning concerns surrounding Russia avoiding sanctions by using crypto assets, and of course, also the ability to get payments to Ukraine using crypto assets. There is a bit of an update here. Interestingly, Binance will limit services to Russian nationals and those residing in the country with crypto assets greater than 10,000 euros. Anything under this amount will also be limited in terms of withdrawals, and also no active trading will be allowed. This, of course, goes on the back of the Euro's fifth sanction package. Away from that, we've also learned that the U.S. Treasury has sanctions on Russian crypto mining firms, essentially saying that the ability to mine crypto allows them to monetize their natural resources. Interestingly, as well, we always keep our eyes on financial firms and their move into the crypto and digital space. We have learned through the Financial Times that Goldman Sachs' CEO, David Solomon, has met with FTX's CEO, that of course is an exchange, a crypto exchange, to perhaps discuss working together. Away from that, we've also heard a New York-based asset management called Simplify Asset Management has filed with the SEC to launch a Bitcoin risk-managed ETF, income ETF that is, and that's what's key. You might wonder, what would that mean? What is an income ETF that's backed by crypto assets? Well, apparently they're looking to generate income by investing in US Treasuries with an overlay option, so writing calls and also buying puts on Bitcoin futures. Bottom line, what this really means or how it translates is that whatever you saw kind of going on in the more historical financial markets is actually shifting and moving over to the crypto and digital world. Away from that, interesting Barron's article talking about Bitcoin-backed mortgages are coming soon. Basically, the ability to have a mortgage with Bitcoin as your collateral. Obviously, the crypto world is trying to crack that $2.6 trillion mortgage market. And there is a company doing this already. It's called Milo, and they are offering 30-year mortgages backed by crypto assets. Stats here are kind of interesting. They are apparently working with about 700 potential buyers for pre-approvals, and they have made $5 to $10 million in loans. Away from that, we're also, of course, keeping our eyes on Bitcoin miners. There's one called Crusoe Energy. They have closed over a $500 million new raise of capital, and that is to expand their flare gas operations. Recall, we are seeing more and more energy companies that emit energy that they can't use, combining in and partnering with mining companies. So further interest in that area for sure, not going away. Lastly, I'll end on this, Nima. Back in March of 2020, Jack Dorsey, of course, the founder of Twitter, sold his first tweet ever from 2006 on an Ethereum-based NFT for $2.9 million, Well, last week it sold for multiples of that amount. In fact, headline grabbing prices. Now, we are actually seeing that take place within the NFT world, and there is some scrutiny in terms of what kind of trading is actually taking place. So I'll leave it with you on that front to figure that part out, because there is, again, some scrutiny in terms of why are these valuations so high. Nima, I'll leave it there. Back to you.
Now, that's a very pricey tweet, Catherine. Thanks for that. That was Catherine Murray giving us the rundown of what's happening in the world of crypto and digital assets. Catherine is the host of The Buck Stops Here, so be sure to follow her there for analysis and news on the markets. All right, well, from the digital world to the real one. On Earth Day, the Nature Conservancy of Canada is announcing a big move. It's buying more than 1,400 square kilometers of boreal forest in northern Ontario. This and what it's calling the largest private land conservation project in Canadian history. The area is home to 100 lakes and 1,300 kilometers of rivers and streams. It's a critical habitat for black bears, wolves, moose, and the endangered woodland caribou. The conservation designation means no industrial development can take place on the site. But the Conservancy is working on a plan that would allow access for recreational use. Forum Daily will be right back with news from around the world. The Pentagon says Ukrainian troops remain in Mariupol. Over 30 people are dead after an Afghanistan mosque attack. We'll have these stories and more up next. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby says Ukrainian troops are still holding on to Mariupol. This is despite Russian President Vladimir Putin's claim of victory. He says U.S. assessments conclude the southern port city has not been taken by the Russians. Yesterday, Mr. Putin ordered his troops not to storm a giant steel mill, but to seal it off instead. This is where an estimated 2,000 Ukrainians remain holed up. Mr. Putin may be making this move in order to free up his troops for a broader campaign in the east. All right, well, meanwhile, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, also weighed in on the Russian war. She said that in the 8 weeks since Russia invaded Ukraine, international humanitarian law has not merely been ignored, but seemingly tossed aside. Her office says Russian forces have indiscriminately shelled and bombed populated areas. This also led to the killing of civilians, wrecking hospitals and schools in what may amount to war crimes. The High Commission's office in Ukraine so far has verified 2,345 deaths. It believes the actual numbers will be much higher as the horrors inflicted in the areas of intense fighting, such as Mariupol, emerge. Afghanistan's Taliban rulers have spoken out on a recent bombing at a mosque and religious school in the north. The attack killed at least 33 people, including students of the religious school. Zabihullah Mujahid tweeted news of the devastating bombing on Friday in the town of Imam Sahib in Kunduz province. He said it also wounded another 43 people, many of them students. No one immediately claimed responsibility for the bombing, but Afghanistan's Islamic State affiliate on Thursday claimed a series of bombings. This included an attack on a Shiite mosque in northern Mazar-e Sharif that killed at least 12 Shiite Muslim worshippers and wounded others. Moving to France now, where the finalists for the presidency, President Emmanuel Macron and far-right leader Marine Le Pen, continue to trade blows. This on the last day of legal campaigning as they tried to appeal to undecided voters. Mr. Macron, the center-right incumbent, laid into Ms. Le Pen and is set to face her in the Sunday runoff. During his final campaign speech, Mr. Macron described the election as a referendum for or against a secular, united, indivisible republic. And he presented himself as a guardian of democratic values. Ms. Le Pen was behind Mr. Macron in the latest opinion polls, and in a last-ditch effort to close the gap, she said Mr. Macron's planned pension reforms would make the French work forever. Trouble in East Africa, where leaders say they will proceed with an urgent plan to deploy a regional force in Congo. Some areas in the country's east have long been wrecked by sporadic violence. The decision was announced by Kenyan authorities in a statement following a meeting on Thursday of regional leaders under the East African Community Bloc. That meeting in Nairobi, the Kenyan capital, resolved to accelerate the establishment of a regional force to help contain and, where necessary, fight the negative forces. It remains unclear how such a force would be staffed, and there were no details on when it would be ready to deploy. Moving to the U.S. now, where researchers at the University of California, San Francisco estimate COVID-19 vaccinations prevented 19,000 deaths in the state. Their study also suggests vaccinations prevented more than 1.5 million COVID infections and 72,000 hospitalizations in the first 10 months of last year. Experts say the value of vaccination is likely to be larger with the emergence of more transmissible variants, such as Omicron. This Earth Day, Tesla CEO Elon Musk has announced the winners of his $100 million X Prize competition for the most promising ideas for reducing greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. The 15 initial milestone round winners announced today will each get $1 million to help them carry on and scale up their work. Winning ideas range from restoring rainforests by farming algae on cleared lands to producing a sort of artificial limestone with a process mimicking ocean chemistry. Well, as bad as the environment seems with climate change and other pollution, scientists indicate humanity has also done a good job of cleaning up past messes. More than 25 experts shared their favorite ecological success stories for Earth Day. The overwhelming number one success story is the healing of Earth's ozone hole. Experts credit a 1987 agreement and ban on certain chemicals for preventing 2 million people from getting skin cancer. Scientists also tout cleaner air and water in industrialized nations and the saving of many endangered species. That'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.